Hey, it's Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader, and welcome to the Black Belt Leadership Podcast, where each week I'm giving you tips, tools, insights, and resources to help you become a better version of who you are and what you do as you discover, develop, and deploy your own Black Belt leader within. Hey, this week I want to talk about an interesting subject: how to think. Let me open with a question. When was the last time you thought about how you think? Now, I'm not talking about what you think or why you think, but how you think. Now, maybe for some of us, a better question is whether or not we're actually thinking, especially if we find ourselves making choices that aren't serving us well. Maybe it's if and when we think, and not so much the how, the what, or the why. But I want to go back to the question I opened with. When was the last time you thought about how you think? For many people, it's maybe a question you've never considered or spent a lot of time thinking about, but it's a very important question. Every one of us should spend some time contemplating, especially if we're striving to become more successful. If we are committed, as many of you are that listen to this podcast every week, to discovering, developing, deploying your own Black Belt leader within, so you can become a world class master of who you are and what you do. But you may be asking the question, John, why is this important? Well, let me tell you why. Because as you think, you become. And if you're not aware of how you think and you're not being intentional in that process, here's what's happening. You're likely thinking thoughts that lead to actions and behaviors that are sabotaging your success. Those same thoughts can also hold you back from achieving your full potential, and they can limit your ability to lead yourself effectively and lead others. How you think is going to have a major impact on what you think, why you think, and the outcomes in life that come as a result of the thoughts that you're thinking. So, understanding the how behind the what and the why of thinking can have a very powerful impact on the quality of life that you and I experience as a result. So, what does how thinking actually consist of? I want to give you a handful of ideas around how thinking. How thinking first means to look within, to educate yourself, to contemplate, to explore the opportunities that are around us. How thinking also means to consider or to question and to look around to gain greater understanding. How thinking also means to compare, to evaluate various options to determine the best course of action moving forward. How thinking also means to challenge, to validate, and look at, is there a better way? And how thinking also means to conquer or to overcome what's holding us back. Let me give those to you again: to look within, to educate, to contemplate, to explore, to consider or to question, to compare, which means to evaluate, to challenge, which means to validate, and to conquer, which means to overcome. Now, as you look at these attributes of how thinking, all of these elements together are essential to help you discover, develop, and deploy your own Black Belt leader within. They are instrumental in helping you rise to your full potential and ultimately becoming a world class master of who you are and what you do. But sadly, there's far too many people who approach how thinking with what is known as confirmation bias. Now, maybe you've heard of that topic, maybe you haven't. Let me explain what confirmation bias is. You and I, we all have a tendency, if we're not being intentional about the way we think, to search for, to interpret, or to process information in a way that simply affirms our existing belief system. What we already believe to be true, confirmation bias leans into other supporting thoughts that validate that. But our belief system has its own prejudices, biases, and preconceptions that we need to be aware of that oftentimes we aren't. Now, add to that our propensity to place more emphasis on the very first piece of information that comes into our thoughts that allows that thought to influence any subsequent thought or idea. This is a process known in the human behavior world as anchoring. When we get into anchoring and we get into confirmation bias, what happens? How thinking relies on ideas or thoughts that are often incomplete, incorrect, or inaccurate. So think about that, pun intended. Think about that. When we are not engaging in how thinking the right way, we literally end up leaning in and accepting and embracing and acting on ideas or thoughts that are incomplete, incorrect, or inaccurate. Now, if we're not cognizant of how we think, what happened? We tend to reject thoughts that don't align with our existing view of the world or the answer that we're trying to validate. We grasp the first idea that comes to our attention to the detriment of every other great idea that may be out there without fully weighing all of our options. But when we do that, here's what happens. We close our minds to the possibilities outside of the limits that we or others have placed on ourselves. And as a result, biased how thinking leads us to see the world the way we've always seen it. Status quo thinking that leaves us stuck where we are, as we are, unchanged. Now, there's two primary types of how thinking that you and I engage in. One is critical thinking, and the other is creative thinking. Critical thinking involves analyzing and interpreting information to either form a judgment or make a decision. Creative thinking, on the other hand, refers to the process of thinking outside the box, to allow our mind to explore and to create new ideas, new concepts, or novel solutions that we hadn't yet considered before. But if you and I are not intentional about our how thinking, here's what happened. We allow confirmation bias and anchoring to limit our ability to, number one, think critically, and number two, it stifles our ability to think creatively. Remember, as you think, you become. And if you limit your thinking, you limit your becoming. That's why a concept called metacognition is so important. Now, you may be saying, John, what in the world is metacognition? That sounds like something out of a science fiction movie. Well, it's actually not. Metacognition is literally thinking about thinking. It is an intentional process of planning, of monitoring, and evaluating our thought life all throughout the day, allowing us to regulate how we think, what we think, and why we think a specific way. Metacognition is essentially becoming aware of our thinking so that as we improve the quality of our thinking, we can improve the quality of the actions and the outcomes that follows. Now, one of my mentors for several years was Christian Simpson, and he sums up metacognition this way. Let me give you a quote. He says this: "Your business and the quality of life it affords you will never outperform the quality of thinking that you bring to it." Now, think about that statement. Your business, your life, and the quality of thinking that you bring to that is going to dictate how you live and enjoy life and the amount of success you're going to experience. Now, as I've shared in prior lessons, it's important to remember that you and I are the sum total of the individuals who poured into our lives in those early formative first years of our existence. Now, that could be our parents, our siblings, pastors, teachers, friends, and early influencers that all shaped our thinking. They helped us establish, right or wrong, the belief system that we have embraced, unless we've challenged it or questioned it through how thinking. Now, this process of our friends and family and neighbors and other influencers shaping the way we view the world is known as social conditioning. In school, in home, and in society, what are we taught? We're taught typically what to think rather than how to think. And as a result of that, it became more about conformity than individuality. And when it becomes more about conformity than individuality, what happens? It stifles our how thinking at an early age, and it leaves us settling for less in life. Now, our past experience also influence our how thinking. Dr. Gerald Jampolsky was the director of the Center for Attitudinal Health for many, many years. He says our past experiences are stored as movie reels in our mind. When we think about or experience a similar thought or something that happened in the past, here's what happened. Our mind goes to that movie vault. It replays a movie reel of a similar experience in real time. And as a result of that, it hijacks us from the moment and takes us back to the past. Now, the quality of our thinking is going to directly impact the quality of our becoming. Poor thinking leads to poor actions and leads to poor outcomes. That's a given. Negative thinking leads to limiting behaviors, often resulting in our taking no action or we avoid taking any action at all. When we don't regulate our how thinking, we often end up engaging in status quo thinking by default. And when we focus on the status quo, we only experience more of the same. It goes back to that old adage, if you do the same thing the same way over and over again, you're going to experience the same outcome. Albert Einstein said the very definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. That's what we're talking about with status quo thinking. But when we start to improve the quality of our how thinking, we begin to improve the quality of what we think and the underlying why of those thoughts. And that leads us to make better choices. It leads to better outcomes and ultimately more success in our lives. When we evaluate the quality of how thinking, we evaluate our problem solving and critical skills. And when we elevate the quality of our thinking, we elevate our problem solving critical skills. And at the same time, if we're elevating how thinking, we're opening our minds to the endless possibilities always around us and giving our minds an opportunity to see and seize those. When we expand the quality of our how thinking, we free our minds to engage in limitless creative thinking. So at this point, you may be saying, okay, John, I like the idea, but how do we improve our how thinking? Let me give you three thoughts along those lines. To improve your how thinking, you need an open mind, an open heart, and an open commitment. So let's dive into those for just a moment. First, we approach how thinking with an open mind. We're talking about a mind that's free of bias, free of prejudice, or free of precondition. How do we do that? We practice mindfulness, being present in the moment. That allows us to increase our awareness of the thoughts we're thinking, and it also allows us to minimize reactive emotional thinking that tends to hijack our thoughts and take us in a direction that often doesn't serve us well. When we are mindful in our thinking, approaching how thinking with an open mind, guess what? We have an opportunity to now focus on a chosen topic, a chosen idea, or a chosen thought, rather than allowing our minds to wander and go to and fro. And if we can stay focused, we can bring about more things in our lives. Now, the second part of this is approaching how thinking with an open heart. When we approach with an open heart, we're willing to put aside the past and all the emotions that it stirs, often negative, and we're willing to be present in the moment, understanding this. Each and every moment has a lesson to teach us or to reveal something new to us if we're willing to be open and willing to learn. But when we learn to recognize negative or limiting thoughts, we begin to realize those are the things that have held us back from saying, doing, and becoming more. And when we approach how thinking with an open heart, we can challenge that negative or limited thinking, knowing that as we begin to retrain our minds to think in a new and different and better way, we're going to challenge the status quo that keeps us stagnant and limits our potential. Now, thirdly, we want to approach how thinking with an open commitment to act on new information, to act on new learning, and to act and seize and pursue new opportunities and new discoveries. We are unwilling to remain where we are, as we are, unchanged, when we have an open commitment to move forward. When we approach how thinking with an open commitment to change, we have dedicated and committed ourselves, as I know you have as black belt leaders in life, to begin to personally learn, grow, mature, expand, and daily become a better version of who you are and what you do than you were the day before. When we approach with an open commitment to change, we are committed to improving the quality of our thinking so that we can improve the quality of our becoming. Remember, as you think, you become. And when we improve the quality of our how thinking, things begin to change. When we improve the quality of our how thinking, life begins to get better and we begin to experience more success in our lives. So, how do we do it? We improve our how thinking when we approach it with an open mind, an open heart, and an open commitment to change. Remember, how thinking, we look within to educate. We contemplate so we can explore. We consider so we can question. We compare so we can evaluate. We challenge so that we can validate, and we conquer so that we can overcome. This is how to think. I'm Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day.